No way. Oh my God. Oh my goodness. This is it. No, this is incredible. I can't believe it's here. Oh my goodness. Oh my God.
Do you want to take a picture of this?
You're on camera. We got it all. We'll get the photos at the end. Dr. Irene Butter. Irene Butter is a Holocaust survivor and professor emeritus in the School of Public Health at the University of Michigan. She's the founder of the Raoul Wallenberg Awards and Lecture Series, the author of the acclaimed novel Shores Beyond Shores, From Holocaust to Hope. She's received the highest non-military award the German government has to offer, the Anne Frank Award. She's a knight. As a German Jew born in 1930, she was witness to the horrors of Nazism, totalitarianism, the Second World War, and the Jewish Holocaust, and was one of the last people to see Anne Frank alive. She continues to teach, run the Raoul Wallenberg series, and bear witness to middle school and high school classes. Thank you so much for coming and doing this. I'm so grateful.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
I'm not allowed to touch this. This belongs in a museum. I'm not allowed to touch it. Put it somewhere safe. Put this somewhere very safe. My goodness. Thank you so much. I had a project called 3 Pieces of Me, which was this idea to ask people about their lives by having them show me objects that had significance, some kind of emotional significance. I started doing it at my grandma's retirement home. She had people that were living there that hadn't really been able to open up. And when I would go into their apartments and ask them to show me something, you know, they would pull out these telegrams from their husband when he was in the military, these little pieces of paper, but, you know, these scraps held the significance, held the key to kind of unlocking their lives.
This was your father's mother, right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. In Florida. When did you get the Posey book? Was this in Holland?
Yeah.
But when you got it, you were living a kind of a peaceful, happy life in Holland? Not really, because you'd already left Germany.
Right.
Yeah.
And leaving Germany was the first disruption in my family because I lived with my grandparents and they couldn't come to the Netherlands. So that was a big change.
Yeah. You were born in Berlin in 1930.
Correct.
December 11th?
Yeah.
Happy early birthday.
Yes.
Um,
Coming up.
So 1930 Berlin, being born Jewish, not the best flip of the coin or roll of the dice.
Well, Hitler came into power in 1933. So that's when the persecution of Jews began.
Before that, your father was able to work in your grandfather's bank. You remember going to school with all the other kids. Life was sort of peaceful. It was normal. Or how do you describe your life before Holland?
Well, I always think of my childhood as having been idyllic. Beautiful home, living with loving parents. My brother was 2 years older than I. We got along well. And these loving grandparents that spoiled us.
When did you first become aware that something was wrong? That there was, was it the yellow stars? Was it, hearing Hitler on the radio? What was what was kind of the first kind of clue that things were not
A
going?
lot of, I was very little, but I saw all these swastikas everywhere. I didn't know what they meant. And I think my parents wanted to protect me and my brother as much as possible from what was going on. So I didn't have much of an impression, except when my father, the bank was taken away and he became unemployed, and that's when he went to Amsterdam to escape Hitler and find a job. And he did find a position with the American Express company in Amsterdam, and my mother, my brother, and I followed, I guess not realizing that fleeing to the Netherlands wasn't far enough. So then the Nazis invaded the Netherlands.
Right. Were there other alternatives? Could you have gone to Palestine, or were there, did people that were living in Berlin, Jewish community members in Berlin, go to other places aside from Holland?
Well, my father had a choice between Amsterdam and one of the Dutch colonies. Can't remember.
Guyana or somewhere in South America, something like that.
Right.
Connects to the passports later, right? You had the Ecuadorian passports?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he chose the Netherlands because it was very close, and made the wrong choice.
There was no way of knowing what was to come. I mean, I don't think anyone had a clue that the ultimate,
No, you're right.
that this would turn into a Holocaust of Jews, that there would be this.
Nobody had a clue, and to the extent that there were some signals, people were in denial.
It was so much to uproot your whole life, even to move one country over. It's an enormous undertaking. And
Right.
like you said, your grandparents, these are your mom's parents.
Yes.
Once you got to Holland, again, things changed pretty quickly, right? So
2 years.
You'd spend a couple years going to the beach and going to school with classmates who were non-Jewish and living, again, a kind of a childhood, having
Right.
somewhat of a childhood.
Learning a new language that was easy. Very, very quickly, my brother and I learned Dutch, spoke it fluently, and it was all positive. We made friends. It was a good life. People from Germany who went to more distant countries often stopped in Amsterdam, so we got to see them. And yes, until the Nazis invaded, it was good life.
I think about your father's war friend, his war buddy, who you have the picture in there, the guy who crossed your name off the list when you were in the theater, right? Is that the theater or Westerbork? Whichever one.
In Westerbork.
The Jewish Germans fought in World War I. That was your family's experience.
Yeah.
That your father fought in the trenches in World War I alongside the rest of the Germans. How was it possible that it changed within one generation, where people were willing to round up their former friends, neighbors, countrymen, military soldiers within the same unit, and put it into camps and then exterminate them? I don't understand it.
Well, I don't know if anybody does, really. People were complicit. a lot of people after the war claimed they didn't know. A few months ago, I was invited to come to Bergen-Belsen for the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the camp. And it occurred to me when we drove there that the camp was not far from residential houses. So how could they say they didn't know? How is that possible?
I'm forgetting the name of the film, but there was a recent film where it shows that dichotomy of people living at a concentration camp, basically as civilians, German civilians, and seeing the crematoria, seeing, the fencing, and not, I guess, stopping their lives of bread and pudding and whatever else they were doing. It's hard to fathom, I guess. Where do you land? How are you able to continue your life? And, after you experience this, I guess we should continue the story, is that basically after a couple years in Holland, the Nazis invade and your family had a choice whether to go into hiding like the Franks or to, try to get these passports. That's kind of where our story leads, right?
Sent to Bergen-Belsen because we had the passports, because we were exchange Jews. Bergen-Belsen was a big place. There were 8 separate camps there, but it was also called the Star Camp because we all had to wear the Jewish stars there.
Yeah.
So it's still in my mind a miracle. My father wrote to a consul. He'd gotten the contact information. They sent the passports, but we were already in Westerbork when they arrived. If they had arrived a little later, we might have been sent to Auschwitz, but they arrived somewhere, I don't know, I would say the fall of 1943. And then we were deported to Bergen-Belsen, and because of the passports. And you often wonder if the Nazis were so interested in using us to trade for German citizens to come back from America. That's why they had this program. Then why did the conditions of the camp were such that so many people died? We could have been dead before the exchange took place. So we came to Bergen-Belsen in February of 1944, and because of the passports, we became part of an exchange in January of 1945. So we were there good part of a year.
11 months in hell. And just like you said, this is the sick irony. There was this program to try to trade you for prisoners of war, but they didn't feed you. So people were dying and malnourished and
right.
So that was one. There's this kind of bizarre situation where your brother Werner is working in the shoe factory, but his shoes don't fit him because if he tried to even take a part of a shoe, he would have probably been beaten to death. And so his feet get frostbite and he can barely walk out of there.
Right.
There's, it's so many layers to the cruelty and it's, I guess, so hard for people to understand. Maybe just knowing what happened is enough, and then you can kind of try to sort out the why over years. But hearing the story, I think, is very important. trying to get the facts right.
Yes, and then we are included in this exchange transport and put on a train to Switzerland. But the second night in this train, my father dies.
And so that gets to the, one of the other cruel ironies of the war, which is this concept of the capo, right? So, your father is beaten by a capo, is beaten by a Jewish guard or Jewish, I don't know how to describe it, someone who's taken on additional responsibilities.
I don't know that the capos were Jews.
Oh, interesting.
They were prisoners. They were in a separate camp. And they were prisoners that committed some kind of crime. And they were used to help the Nazis beat up the Jews.
There's so many things that I feel like I learned from your book, and I absolutely recommend everyone get it, read it. This is an unbelievable, harrowing story. It's a kind of a amazing success story if you think about all that you've accomplished in your life since, the liberation and Algiers, and but I think it's such an important story for people to hear, because I like how you said you didn't want to just be a survivor. You wanted to survive and be good. You didn't want to be somebody who
I didn't want to be a victim. I didn't want to see myself as a victim, which most people do when they're victimized. And of course, I was a victim, but I didn't want to frame that the rest of my life, victimhood. And I think that applies more generally, not just Holocaust survivors, who, once they're victims, they continue to think of themselves as victims for the rest of their lives. And my own feeling was that if you choose that victimhood, then you feel the world owes you things because of what happened to you, and you feel powerless, and it's not constructive. So I decided I wanted to be a survivor, and that gave me more strength and also the power to accomplish things in my life. If I survived that, then I can do a lot of things.
Why do you think you kept it inside when you got to America and you didn't talk about your experiences? I guess, when I hear Elie Wiesel and answer that question, it's something like, we didn't think anyone was going to believe us. And if, and also it was too painful to even talk about. Like, we had just been through something that no one has ever understood before or since.
And people didn't want to listen. When we first came to America, we had relatives, and they wouldn't listen. If we started saying something, we were silenced. They just couldn't stand listening to it. And that changed. I mean, the world didn't listen for a long time. It took time before you saw movies and people wrote books and there were newspaper articles. It didn't happen right away. So it's very interesting that when I first came to America, nobody would listen. And also, as you said, it was painful. So even my mother, my brother, and I didn't talk about it, except for very superficial ways, like we never want to eat turnips again, something like that. We might talk but and now the world has changed so much that I think it's 32 states have laws that mandate Holocaust and genocide education in public schools.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What about in Germany? My understanding was it was pretty much mandatory there, universally.
For a long time. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is something you're in favor of.
Yes. But the question is, have we really learned anything? To me, that's a big question. If we had, why is history repeating itself?
In terms of genocides in Africa, Gaza, kids dying in Ukraine and Russia, all the death that's still going on, war is kind of your point?
Well, and Trump deporting people.
Yeah, I wonder about that. If the migrants represent this kind of new kind of yellow star, right? Where, you see as someone who was othered, right? You lived in Holland where you were forced to put this thing on your clothing. You had to sew it on if one of the corners, and you talk about how it stood out, but it made you feel like you disappeared. Like people would look through you because of what you wore.
Right.
Is it, you see that kind of same echo in the way that migrants are, being rounded up and deported and subject to abuse and things like that?
Yes. That is very heartbreaking for me to see that 80 years later, this kind of treatment of humanity has reoccurred.
This one blew me away. Donald Trump, he posts about the 1927 Calvin Coolidge law, which my understanding is the reason that boatloads of Jews who showed up in New Jersey and New York were sent back to the ovens, were sent back to Hitler's Holocaust.
Yeah.
And posting about it proudly, saying, we need to bring this back, this 1927 exclusionary. That blew me away. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that what happened? Isn't that one of the reasons that nobody even considered going to America during the war? That basically it was known that it was closed?
Oh, yeah, it was closed. This famous ship to St. Louis, and that was, I don't know, 100, maybe several hundred Jews. I don't remember exactly where it came from, but it came here, and the door was not open.
Right. What about the idea of repatriation? I don't know about repatriation. Yeah. To the Middle East, to Palestine. So
Yeah.
were there Jews that you knew of that were going in the early 20th century? I guess you weren't alive, but, families that had moved in the early 20th century while, Zionism was kind of taking off. Were there whispers of, we could go?
Yeah, well, we lived in Holland by then, and there were Jews going, and there was actually, I have vague memory of my father getting us on the list to go to Palestine. It never materialized, but many Jews left.
I mean, I assume you still think of yourself as Jewish. How do you think of the Jewish homeland? How do you think of this idea of Israel as a state in the Middle East? The need, like we said, there were boats of Jews being turned away from the U.S. Do we need a homeland? Does it have to be in the Middle East? Those are kind of my two biggest questions.
Yes.
So does there need to be a safe place for Jews to go?
Well, I sympathize with that. One place in the world, right, where they can be safe. But it's not true anymore. It isn't a safe place for anyone. So idealistic. Yes, I want there to be a homeland for the Jews, but not with the kind of government that they have now, which makes it unsafe. And I'm not sure that a nation state is the right concept.
Right. I mean, to me, I see it as it was a place where people of all faiths and all ethnicities lived. The state of Israel had to have a majority of Jewish voting power. Otherwise, laws would be changed and et cetera. So there has to be this exclusionary principle where only a certain number of Arabs are allowed in. And if they grow too high a number, then things have to be instituted in order to keep that limited. It's kind of how I see it.
Well, I think I have a different conception of it. I think that both Arabs and Jews live on the land. None of it belongs to either people. What I mean is all of it doesn't belong to the Palestinians, and all of it doesn't belong to the Jews, even though Orthodox people follow the Bible and in the Torah, and it says this is our land.
Right.
But my concept is if we want to have peace between Arabs and Jews, they have to be recognized as equal human beings with the same rights and the same opportunities. And then they can live together on this land. It shouldn't be a two-state solution because then the war will continue forever. It should be one state where both peoples live together in harmony and equality.
I mean, I think it's a great vision. I actually think that's the way it's going to go. I think that's what Netanyahu is setting up. I think that was the whole project of the Holocaust. I don't want to say Holocaust, but the genocide of Gaza. The bombing of Gaza was to lower the population enough that everything can be incorporated into one state, which will be a Jewish majority once the Arab population is lowered enough. I don't know. Maybe I have a radical view of things.
Yes.
But
I don't think it was necessary to murder so many innocent Palestinians, no matter what the cause or the reason.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, we have to come to some kind of a place where we realize that life is precious, that we're all connected, that we're brothers and sisters. Basically, we're a part of a human family.
Exactly.
And that's, to me, like the biggest piece that's missing. So, but how can stories like yours remind people of that fact? I think it's the fact that there were humans, people who were willing to see you as people, even in this kind of darkest moment. People like, I guess, the physician who counted you as your own mother in order to finally get you exchanged out of Bergen-Belsen. Do you think that was a righteous individual or maybe just a mistake?
We don't know. We'll never know. How could he have thought that I was my mother? I was 14 years old. But then again, we were all seriously malnourished, wearing rags. Maybe there wasn't so much difference in appearance when everyone is compromised.
It also reminds me of one of, to me, the most depressing, heartbreaking, awful things that I've seen related to the Holocaust, which was at Dachau when I saw the medical instruments. They have a exhibit on physicians in World War II, physicians in the Holocaust, but it's the equipment of German doctors who were willing to um, continue, be part of this evilness. It just made me so sick to think that there were professionals,
Yeah.
PhDs, MDs, that were all kind of complicit. Would you say?
Yeah. When their role in life is to preserve healthy people, promote health, and then they do the opposite.
Yeah, it's some kind of sick distortion of what the role of a physician is, or what the role of a human is supposed to be, to
Sure is.
care for each other.
Well, there's one institution in Israel that gives me a lot of hope. This may not happen for a long, long time. It may not spread, but it's a project called Hand in Hand. And there are 7 schools in Israel where this kind of education is practiced. It's bilingual, it's bicultural. Children are admitted from kindergarten on. It's a mix of Palestinians and Jews, and they grow up together from kindergarten through high school. And every class has a teacher who teaches Arabic, and a teacher who uses the Hebrew language, celebrate each other's holidays. And it's a blending of 2 cultures where they grow up as equals. And the graduates of this kind of education would be different human beings.
It's got to be the way forward, right? We have to recognize the humanity in our neighbors.
Exactly.
What about the presentations that you do for the middle schoolers, high schoolers? What about that brings you joy? What's brought you to it and brought you back to it over the years?
Well, there were a number of forces. First of all, my daughter, when she was in middle school, took a course in public speaking. And at the end of the term, she had to give a 1-hour presentation. And the topic she chose was anti-Semitism, Hitler's conquest of Europe, and the concentration camps. And she came home and she said, "Mom, will you be my visual aid and talk about the camps?" So I was shocked. I had never spoken in public, and here to go to a middle school population, and how would they receive this? But I couldn't say no. So that was the first time. And second time, there was an Anne Frank exhibition that traveled throughout the country, and they came to Detroit. And I was invited to be on a panel about Anne Frank. And when I thought about that, it occurred to me that she would never be able to talk like I was. She was silenced forever. And so it is really my duty to tell the stories, because she can't. And then I heard Elie Wiesel one time on the radio, and he said, "If you're a survivor, if you were in the camps, then it's your responsibility to be a witness and to tell the stories. Because if you don't, then the victims will die twice. And that made a deep impression on me. And so after that Anne Frank panel, I was invited to a couple of schools. And then when, sort of by word of mouth, I was invited. Teachers started teaching a course about the Holocaust. And then when it became a law, when it was mandated that that needed to be education about the Holocaust, then I just received more and more invitations. And it's been very rewarding to talk to students, to get them engaged, to send me feedback afterwards, what they've learned. And I just wish I could talk to these students 10 years later and see if they held on to the responsibility that I imparted to them.
Well, you are, and it did, because you had a huge impact on my life growing up. I was at the Raoul Wallenberg seminars. I met Marcel Marceau. I heard Miep speak. I was exposed to your ideas and your story at an early age because of my mom, Irene, and your friendship and the fact that she knew this was going on and she was part of the intellectual scene in the Holocaust studies kind of program in Ann Arbor. And so, so you have the feedback right here. It made a huge difference. Every person can make a difference.
I appreciate that. I have 3 messages I give at the end of my talk to all audiences. The first one is never be a bystander. If you see something that is mean, unjust, evil, then don't turn your back. You'll have to do something about it. So that's the first message. Second is each person can make a difference. You might think as an individual you don't have any power to change anything, but that's not true. You can make small differences or bigger differences. There are many ways of making a difference, and each person has responsibility to do that. And that my third message is refusing to be enemies. Because often we are told that certain people with certain characteristics different from us are our enemies. We don't want to have anything to do with them. And that's the wrong approach. I think it pays off to reach out to people who are different from us, to try to get to know them, to learn about their history and their lives. And that then enriches our own lives and helps to get along better if we refuse to be enemies. So those are my messages.
Beautiful. Yeah. Like I said, it means a lot and it's making a big difference. No question, because it did for me. When you zoom out and try to think about why, I know we kind of talked a little bit. If you try to take this kind of spiritual element of, there's God everywhere and God is good. So why was a Holocaust allowed to happen? What is the, meaning behind it? Where was God?
I haven't seen an answer to that question. An answer that makes sense to me, except that, people are complicated. They have a good side and they can be evil as well as they can be good. And which path they choose depends on, I think, how they grow up, their parents, the values of their parents, and whatever they decide they want to be. And some people, I don't understand it. I don't know if psychologists understand it. Some people are evil.
But a whole nation? A whole
Yeah, that's
continent?
That's the difficulty that we haven't been able to explain or to solve. There is, right now, there isn't any institution in the whole world that can stop Netanyahu from what he's doing. Why is that so? Here, after World War II, we created the United Nations, the International Court of Justice. These institutions don't have power. So I think that's a gap in solutions. These were supposed to be the solutions, but they're not working. But why it happens in the first place, power and money is behind it.
If it was about money, if it was about getting good quality exchanges, they would have fed you. I mean, we talked about that.
Yeah.
This was pure evil. There was hate. That these people hated Jews. And so
Right.
I go back to this another question. That Hitler's Holocaust was one page in a long book of anti-Semitism against Jews, that there were pogroms before, that there was Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, that there have been attacks on Jews as long as we've existed. People have been trying to exterminate us. But that 1930 to 40 represented this new point in time where there was an intersection between hate of Jews and technology, and that somehow IBM and the Hollerith machines, the punch card machines, Zyklon B gas, the automation, that technology somehow made anti-Semitism reach its zenith, its kind of peak. You wrote in 2004, you wrote a paper about EEG technology, about the ways that neuroscience is going to change, that we're going to need more EEG techs because of this new technology. So technologies change the course of history. Was it because of these new technologies that it was, there was Hitler's Holocaust, or was it pure, it was these certain people, they would have found a way to do it in 1800, in 1700, that Hitler was just that evil?
That's my guess. Also, post World War I, there was a depression. There was a huge amount of unemployment in Germany. He changed that by creating a war. Many people got jobs. Many people had to enter the military. So he offered people improvement, and he provided it. And I think that has a lot to do with why he was so successful, why people went along with him rather than opposed him.
I think that's such an important point. You're saying basically when the economy is humming, people are willing to accept evil. Like if the stock market in your 401k goes up, but they're rounding up immigrants in the back of the Lowe's hardware store, maybe you're less willing to stand up and fight it.
Well, I think that's what happened in Germany.
That's a really powerful message.
Well, and now we have Trump, and he makes many promises, but they're all false promises. They're never realized. So why don't people rise to the opportunity of resisting?
There's a lot of reasons for that. Let me see some more questions. When you read the book, right, when you were writing it, how does Dr. Butter's kind of knowledge of what actually happened over the years not insert itself into the story too much, and you're able to really tell the story of you as a teenage girl, as a 13-year-old?
Well, my point was to write a story that is an illustration of what can happen to you if you live in a country ruled by a dictator. That you can lose all your rights, all your freedom, all your property, family. You may get deported. So I want people to realize what dictatorship means in real terms.
Another point I love about the book is, of course, you have the actual transcriptions from the book. You know, it's not the photographs, but you can tell right away that because you have the exact wording of these messages that people gave you, that somehow you survived the war, were able to go back and get this stuff that you had hidden. You almost didn't hide the book. So it is just one of, I guess, many miracles that it was preserved. But when you have at the beginning of the book these lines from the Posey book, it gives you this kind of foreknowledge that you're going to make it back home someday, that the war is going to end, that it's going to have an ending that's not, tragic. It reminds me of, films like Carlito's Way, where they kind of give you that initial kind of foreknowledge that allows you to, it carries you through the rest of the book. It's a great book. It's amazing, really.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The Poesie book has 2 letters of my teachers, who were then my teachers. And this is during the war. And it's fascinating to read those letters that they wrote at that time. We were exiled from public schools, had to go to Jewish schools, taught by Jewish teachers. And it was a very difficult experience because in each class, more and more students disappeared because they were deported. So their school benches were left empty. And that emptiness to look at every day when you go to school, and you know why. They either went into hiding or they got deported. And that's a very, very destructive environment for learning.
Yeah, that's what happened with Rudy. That was your boyfriend, or your male childhood friend.
Right.
Was disappeared from school. And similar to the experience at Westerbork, where the train shows up Sunday night, and then you have to see the train in the middle of the camp, and you know that whoever is on the list is going to Auschwitz. So it's this kind of constant process of
Right.
fear, and it all restarts again. And just waiting and hoping not to be on the list.
Right.
What was it that kept you all together, that kept you from giving up hope? What was it? Was it the humor, like the way it reads in the book, that you were able to have that banter with each other? Was it faith, spirituality? What was it that allowed you to survive?
Being with my family. There are many instances where children are separated from their family, either in the concentration camp or they're sent to different camps. So that in itself is very destructive act. And we were not observant of our religion, very minimally. So I remember the family was in the same barrack that we lived in, and they were Orthodox Jews. And, they had 6 or 7 kids. And every Friday night, they tried to celebrate Shabbat. And even in the camp, they continued to do it. They didn't have many of the things that normally you would have. But whatever they did have, the meal that night and candles, they used up candles, so they couldn't use those anymore. But they would sing as a family. And sometimes I envied that family, but it just wasn't in my family history.
Was it important for you to keep your Jewishness here in the U.S.?
Oh, yes. I will always be a Jew. There's no question about that.
Because it's part of your family. It's who you are. It's where you come from, and
the values that have become mine.
Would you say that that's why Anne Frank might not have made it, is because she wasn't with her family? Because it was just her and Margot, right? In Bergen-Belsen?
Well, in hiding, they were all together.
Right.
Then they came to Auschwitz, and the mother died, and she and her sister stayed together. And eventually they ended up in Bergen-Belsen. So she always had her sister.
Yeah.
But many people think that if she and her sister, Margot, had known that the father was still alive, maybe they would have survived.
Otto, right?
Yeah.
Who?
They knew the mother had died.
Wow. Yeah. It must have been so hard, getting news from the outside. You talk about finding the notes in the walls of the cattle cars, and that's how you first found out about the ovens. And, the news getting piece is just so impossible. News from the outside world, a postcard from Rudy that you were distressed that you'd forgotten. How did people communicate? How were you able to, were there radios people smuggled? Or?
No, it was illegal. When we still lived in Amsterdam, it was illegal to listen to BBC. And so my parents had a radio, and they would go in the bedroom, put the radio under the blankets, and listen to BBC that way, because the Dutch stations didn't have any news.
Incredible.
And of course, in the camps, we didn't have a radio.
It could be a little far out, but do you have a theory about who betrayed the Franks, their hiding place? The annex?
Yeah, I don't know. There have been many speculations whether they actually have evidence. I haven't kept up with it.
Yeah. But she was, they lived in the same neighborhood as you in is it Amsterdam?
Yes.
Yeah. What was it like going back to some of these places? So you went back to Bergen-Belsen, you've been back. Have you, where else have you been back to in Europe? And did you go back to Algiers? What was the experience like?
Well, I went back to the house where we lived in Amsterdam, and that's just like it always was. No change. Very old place, but still standing. And, well, I went back. There was a trip my family took. My brother, his kids, and myself and my son. And So we went to Amsterdam, we went to Westerbork, Bergen-Belsen, Laupheim, that's the town where my father is buried. So, yeah, I tell you, in 91, my family made this trip. We came to Bergen-Belsen, and there was still some buildings that had been preserved and some structures that were rebuilt to show what they had looked like. And so you got the feeling of the camp. But now, recently, when I was invited to the 80th anniversary, there's nothing except for mass graves with stones that tell you how many dead bodies are buried there. And so it looks like a cemetery, but has no resemblance to the camp.
What should be done with these places? You know, what's the right way to do it? Is there to do it like a museum or make it into a like you said, a cemetery or,
I think they should maintain some of the buildings. There's a glass. The building is totally surrounded by glass, so it'll be preserved. So it's not going to collapse. It doesn't deteriorate because of weather. Vegetable. Yeah. So they do some preservation, and I think it's very disappointing to go to Bergen-Belsen and don't see anything that makes it look like a camp. And why was it done? Who made the decisions? I don't know. But in 91, they still had some semblance of buildings.
Thinking more about education, right? Because that's kind of the role that these things play, is that it's a way of making sure that people don't forget.
Right.
Remember the Holocaust, never forget, never again. Is there like a museum that's gotten it right for you? Is there an exhibit that's gotten it right for you? A book, a film where you feel like, yeah, that was accurate, or that seemed right?
A lot of young people get taken to Auschwitz, called the March of the Living, and that's been for years. I guess that's the place to go. It's been preserved, and it's very moving.
So maybe they did it correctly, or as best as they could.
Yeah, I haven't been there, but anybody I've talked to, everybody says you don't ever forget it.
You spent years doing everything you could not to go there.
True.
And, got very, very close a few times with the family. I think the two big ones were both times it was kind of righteous Gentiles scratching you off the list, right? Basically, it was the passports arriving just in time. It was how did they got forwarded from your address in Holland?
Yeah.
Maybe.
And I don't know how that happened.
Incredible. And then being scratched off the list by the war buddy. So individual people making a difference, seeing your humanity.
Yes, I wish they were not so exceptional, these stories.
Yeah. Well, do you ever think about what it was that allowed you to make it where other people didn't? What was it about you specifically that allowed you to kind of survive when other people wouldn't have?
Well, I was lucky I never got typhus. That was the epidemic. a huge epidemic in Bergen-Belsen. I don't know how I managed not to get it. Many people died that way, and you have no control. And other than that, I wanted to survive. I wanted to live. My dream, I described in my book. I had read about Heidi. Heidi was a little girl. She was an orphan, and she was sent to live with her grandfather in Switzerland in the mountains. And there was also a film, and she was skiing in Switzerland, and that was my dream, was I would survive, and I would go to Switzerland. I would learn to ski.
And you got Detroit.
What's that?
And you ended up getting Detroit. Well, we got mountains of garbage.
Yes. So true. But that didn't matter because the dream came true.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing, you talk about being, normal young woman things in your book, about clothes, about boys, and like, it's very, to me, that's the other thing that surprises me, is this is a story where you can tell you were a human being. You're not just this kind of cog in a wheel of machinery that Nazis are kind of moving around and pushing into different cities, that you had these jokes and you have this whole inner life of, like you said, dreams and wishes and goals. I have to say, it kind of reminded me of the Anne Frank experience, where, she was writing about her, being a young woman and kind of just, it's surprising to have those two things existing at the same time, to be a human being inside of pure evil, pure chaos, pure inhumanity.
Well, I had a wonderful childhood. I think that had a lot to do with it, the way I grew up from early on. And so it was a very good life. There was no conflict. There were no fights. There were no arguments. It was peaceful. And I think that made a difference.
Well, I am respectful of your time. I am so grateful to you, Irene, Dr. Butter. You're just a remarkable human, and absolutely someone I wanted to talk to so much. And thank you all so much for listening. This is much more than I could have ever dreamed of. I'm just so grateful.
Well, it's a pleasure. I didn't know you. I knew you when you were a teenager. That's a long time ago. So now we are both different people, but had
thank God,
a very,
for me,
worthwhile conversation.
I agree. Yeah. Thank you so much for what you do. Thanks for the Raoul Wallenberg work. I hope people will look into that and learn more about what it means to be a righteous Gentile, and what the awards are. I hope that they'll go out and get your book, Shores Beyond Shores. I think it's an important story about how to maintain your humanity in a world of evil. And I'm just so glad that you're here and willing to be a part of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Oh.